Chapter 15 of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philip Griffiths. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 15. The Consent of Athos. Raoul quitted the Palais Royal full of ideas that admitted no delay in execution. He mounted his horse in the courtyard, and followed the road to Blois, while the marriage festivities of Monsieur and the Princess of England were being celebrated with exceeding animation by the courtiers, but to the despair of De Guiche and Buckingham. Raoul lost no time on the road, and in 16 hours he arrived at Blois. As he travelled along, he marshalled his arguments in the most becoming manner. Fever is an argument that cannot be answered, and Raoul had an attack. Athos was in his study, making additions to his memoirs, when Raoul entered, accompanied by Grimaud. Keen-sighted and penetrating, a mere glance at his son told him that something extraordinary had befallen him. "You seem to come on a matter of importance," said he to Raoul, after he had embraced him, pointing to a seat. "Yes, monsieur," replied the young man, "and I entreat you to give me the same kind attention that has never yet failed me." "Speak, Raoul." "I present the case to you, monsieur, free from all preface, for that would be unworthy of you. Mademoiselle de la Valliere is in Paris as one of Madame's maids of honor. I have pondered deeply on the matter. I love Mademoiselle de la Valliere above everything, and it is not proper to leave her in a position where her reputation, her virtue even, may be assailed. It is my wish, therefore, to marry her, monsieur, and I have come to solicit your consent to my marriage." While this communication was being made to him, Athos maintained the profoundest silence and reserve. Raoul, who had begun his address with an assumption of self-possession, finished it by allowing a manifest emotion to escape him at every word. Athos fixed upon Bragelonne a searching look, overshadowed indeed by a slight sadness. "You have reflected well upon it?" he inquired. "Yes, monsieur." "I believe you are already acquainted with my views respecting this alliance?" "Yes, monsieur," replied Raoul, in a low tone of voice; "but you added that if I persisted—" "You do persist, then?" Raoul stammered out an almost unintelligible assent. "Your passion," continued Athos, tranquilly, "must indeed be very great, since, notwithstanding my dislike to this union, you persist in wanting it." Raoul passed his hand trembling across his forehead to remove the perspiration that collected there. Athos looked at him, and his heart was touched by pity. He rose and said: "It is no matter. My own personal feelings are not to be taken into consideration, since yours are concerned. I am ready to give it. Tell me what you want." "Your kind indulgence, first of all, monsieur," said Raoul, taking hold of his hand. "You have mistaken my feelings, Raoul. I have more than mere indulgence for you in my heart." Raoul kissed as devotedly as a lover could have done the hand he held in his own. "Come, come," said Athos, "I am quite ready. What do you wish me to sign?" "Nothing whatever, monsieur, only it would be very kind if you would take the trouble to write to the king, to whom I belong, and solicit his majesty's permission for me to marry Mademoiselle de la Valliere." "Well thought, Raoul. After, or rather before myself, you have a master to consult, that master being the king. It is loyal in you to submit yourself voluntarily to this double proof. I will grant your request without delay, Raoul." The count approached the window, and leaning out, called to Grimaud, who showed his head from an arbour covered with jasmine, which he was occupied in trimming. "My horses, Grimaud," continued the count. "Why this order, monsieur?" inquired Raoul. "We shall set off in a few hours." "Whither?" "For Paris." "Paris, monsieur?" "Is not the king at Paris?" "Certainly." "Well, ought we not to go there?" "Yes, monsieur," said Raoul, almost alarmed by this kind condescension. "I do not ask you to put yourself to such inconvenience, and a letter merely." "You mistake my position, Raoul. It is not respectful that a simple gentleman, such as I am, should write to his sovereign. I wish to speak, I ought to speak to the king, and I will do so. We will go together, Raoul." "You overpower me with your kindness, monsieur." "How do you think his majesty is affected?" "Towards me, monsieur?" "Yes." "Excellently well disposed." "You know that to be so?" continued the count. "The king has himself told me so." "On what occasion?" "Upon the recommendation of M. d'Artagnan, I believe, and on account of an affair in the Place de Greve, when I had the honor to draw my sword in the king's service. I have reason to believe that, vanity apart, I stand well with his majesty." "So much the better." "But I entreat you, monsieur," pursued Raoul, "not to maintain towards me your present grave and serious manner. Do not make me bitterly regret having listened to a feeling stronger than anything else." "That is the second time you have said so, Raoul. It was quite unnecessary. You require my formal consent, and you have it. We need talk no more on the subject, therefore. Come and see my new plantations, Raoul." The young man knew very well that after the expression of his father's wish, no opportunity of discussion was left him. He bowed his head and followed his father into the garden. Athos slowly pointed out to him the grafts, the cuttings, and the avenues he was planting. This perfect repose of manner disconcerted Raoul extremely. The affection with which his own heart was filled seemed so great, that the whole world could hardly contain it. How then could his father's heart remain void and closed to its influence? Bragelonne, therefore, collecting all his courage, suddenly exclaimed, "It is impossible, monsieur, you can have any reason to reject Mademoiselle de la Valliere. In Heaven's name, she is so good, so gentle and pure, that your mind, so perfect in its penetration, ought to appreciate her accordingly. Does any secret repugnance, or any hereditary dislike, exist between you and her family?" "Look, Raoul, at that beautiful lily of the valley," said Athos. "Observe how the shade and the damp situation suit it, particularly the shadow which that sycamore tree casts over it, so that the warmth, and not the blazing heat of the sun, filters through its leaves." Raoul stopped, bit his lips, and then, with the blood mantling in his face, he said, courageously, "One word of explanation, I beg, monsieur. You cannot forget that your son is a man." "In that case," replied Athos, drawing himself up with sternness, "prove to me that you are a man, for you do not show yourself a son. I begged you to wait the opportunity of forming an illustrious alliance. I would have obtained a wife for you from the first ranks of the rich nobility. I wish you to be distinguished by the splendor which glory and fortune confer, for nobility of descent you have already." "Monsieur," exclaimed Raoul, carried away by a first impulse, "I was reproached the other day for not knowing who my mother was." Athos turned pale, then, knitting his brows like the greatest of all the heathen deities, "I am waiting to learn the reply you made," he demanded, in an imperious manner. "Forgive me, oh, forgive me," murmured the young man, sinking at once from the lofty tone he had assumed. "What was your reply, monsieur?" inquired the count, stamping his foot upon the ground. Monsieur, my sword was in my hand immediately. My adversary placed himself on guard. I struck his sword over the palisade and threw him after it." "Why did you suffer him to live?" "The king has prohibited duelling, and at the moment I was an ambassador of the king." "Very well," said Athos, "but all the greater reason I should see his majesty." "What do you intend to ask him?" "Authority to draw my sword against the man who has inflicted this injury upon me." "If I did not act as I ought to have done, I beg you to forgive me." "Did I reproach you, Raoul?" "Still, the permission you are going to ask from the king?" "I will implore his majesty to sign your marriage contract, but on one condition." "Are conditions necessary with me, monsieur? Command, and you shall be obeyed." "On the condition, I repeat," continued Athos, "that you tell me the name of the man who spoke of your mother in that way." "What need is there that you should know his name? The offense was directed against myself, and the permission, once obtained from his majesty, to revenge it is my affair." "Tell me his name, monsieur." "I will not allow you to expose yourself." "Do you take me for a Don Diego? His name, I say." "You insist upon it?" "I demand it." "The Vicomte de Wardes." "Very well," said Athos, tranquilly, "I know him. But our horses are ready, I see, and instead of delaying our departure for a couple of hours, we will set off at once. Come, monsieur." Chapter 15. Years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philip Griffiths. 10 Years Later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 16. Monsieur becomes jealous of the Duke of Buckingham. While the Comte de la Fere was proceeding on his way to Paris, accompanied by Raoul, the Palais Royal was the theatre wherein a scene of what Moliere would have called excellent comedy was being performed. 4 days had elapsed since his marriage, and Monsieur, having breakfasted very hurriedly, passed into his antechamber, frowning and out of temper. The repast had not been over agreeable. Madame had had breakfast served in her own apartment, and Monsieur had breakfasted almost alone. The Chevalier de Lorraine and Manicamp were the only persons present at the meal, which lasted 3/4 of an hour without a single syllable having been uttered. Manicamp, who was less intimate with his royal highness than the Chevalier de Lorraine, vainly endeavored to detect, from the expression of the prince's face, what had made him so ill humored. The Chevalier de Lorraine, who had no occasion to speculate about anything, inasmuch as he knew all, ate his breakfast with that extraordinary appetite which the troubles of one's friends but stimulates, and enjoyed at the same time both Monsieur's ill humor and the vexation of Manicamp. He seemed delighted, while he went on eating, to detain a prince who was very impatient to move, still at table. Monsieur at times repented the ascendency which he had permitted the Chevalier de Lorraine to acquire over him, and which exempted the latter from any observance of etiquette towards him. Monsieur was now in one of those moods, but he dreaded as much as he liked the chevalier, and contented himself with nursing his anger without betraying it. Every now and then Monsieur raised his eyes to the ceiling, then lowered them towards the slices of pate which the chevalier was attacking, and finally, not caring to betray the resentment, he gesticulated in a manner which Harlequin might have envied. At last, however, Monsieur could control himself no longer, and at the dessert, rising from the table in excessive wrath, as we have related, he left the Chevalier de Lorraine to finish his breakfast as he pleased. Seeing Monsieur rise from the table, Manicamp, napkin in hand, rose also. Monsieur ran rather than walked towards the antechamber, where, noticing an usher in attendance, he gave him some directions in a low tone of voice. Then turning back again, but avoiding passing through the breakfast apartment, he crossed several rooms with the intention of seeking the queen mother in her oratory, where she usually remained. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Anne of Austria was engaged in writing as Monsieur entered. The queen mother was extremely attached to her son, for he was handsome in person and amiable in disposition. He was in fact more affectionate, and it might be more effeminate, than the king. He pleased his mother by those trifling, sympathizing attentions all women are glad to receive. Anne of Austria, who would have been rejoiced to have had a daughter, almost found in this, her favourite son, the attentions, solicitude, and playful manners of a child of 12 years of age. All the time he passed with his mother he employed in admiring her arms, in giving his opinions upon her cosmetics and recipes for compounding essences, in which she was very particular. And then, too, he kissed her hands and cheeks in the most childlike and endearing manner, and had always some sweetmeats to offer her, or some new style of dress to recommend. Anne of Austria loved the king, or rather the regal power in her eldest son. Louis XIV. Represented legitimacy by rights divine. With the king her character was that of the queen mother. With Philip she was simply the mother. The latter knew that, of all places, a mother's heart is the most compassionate and surest. When quite a child he always fled there for refuge when he and his brother quarrelled, often after having struck him, which constituted the crime of high treason on his part, after certain engagements with hands and nails, in which the king and his rebellious subject indulged in their night dresses, respecting the right to a disputed bed, having their servant Laporte as umpire. Philip, conqueror, but terrified at victory, used to flee to his mother to obtain reinforcements from her, or at least the assurance of forgiveness, which Louis XIV. Granted with difficulty, and after an interval. Anne, from this habit of peaceable intervention, succeeded in arranging the disputes of her sons, and in sharing at the same time all their secrets. The king, somewhat jealous of that maternal solicitude which was bestowed particularly on his brother, felt disposed to show towards Anne of Austria more submission and attachment than his character really dictated. Anne of Austria had adopted this line of conduct especially towards the young queen. In this manner she ruled with almost despotic sway over the royal household, and she was already preparing her batteries to govern with the same absolute authority the household of her second son. Anne experienced almost a feeling of pride whenever she saw any one enter her apartment with woebegone looks, pale cheeks, or red eyes, gathering from appearances that assistance was required either by the weakest or the most rebellious. She was writing, we have said, when Monsieur entered her oratory, not with red eyes or pale cheeks, but restless, out of temper and annoyed. With an absent air he kissed his mother's hands, and sat himself down before receiving her permission to do so. Considering the strict rules of etiquette established at the court of Anne of Austria, this forgetfulness of customary civilities was a sign of preoccupation, especially on Philip's part, who of his own accord observed a respect towards her of a somewhat exaggerated character. If, therefore, he so notoriously failed in this regard, there must be a serious cause for it. "What is the matter, Philip?" inquired Anne of Austria, turning toward her son. "A good many things," murmured the prince, in a doleful tone of voice. "You look like a man who has a great deal to do," said the queen, laying down her pen. Philip frowned, but did not reply. "Among the various subjects which occupy your mind," said Anne of Austria, "there must surely be one that absorbs it more than others." "One has indeed occupied me more than any other." "Well, what is it? I am listening." Philip opened his mouth as if to express all the troubles his mind was filled with, and which he seemed to be waiting only for an opportunity of declaring. But he suddenly became silent, and a sigh alone expressed all that his heart was overflowing with. "Come, Philip, show a little firmness," said the queen mother. "When one has to complain of anything, it is generally an individual who is the cause of it. Am I not right?" "I do not say so, madame." "Whom do you wish to speak about? Come, take courage." "In fact, madame, what I might possibly have to say must be kept a profound secret, for when a lady is in the case " "Ah, you are speaking of madame, then?" inquired the queen mother, with a feeling of the liveliest curiosity. "Yes." "Well, then, if you wish to speak of madame, do not hesitate to do so. I am your mother, and she is no more than a stranger to me; yet, as she is my daughter in law, rest assured I shall be interested, even were it for your own sake alone, in hearing all you may have to say about her. Pray tell madame, in your turn, whether you have not remarked something." "Something! Philip, your words almost frighten me from their want of meaning. What do you mean by something?" "Madame is pretty, certainly." "No doubt of it." "Yet not altogether beautiful." "No; but as she grows older, she will probably become strikingly beautiful. You must have remarked the change which a few years have already made in her. Her beauty will improve more and more. She is now only 16 years of age. At 15 I was myself very thin, but even as she is at present, Madame is very pretty." "And consequently others have remarked it." "Undoubtedly, for a woman of ordinary rank is noticed, and with still greater reason a princess." "She has been well brought up, I suppose?" "Madame Henrietta, her mother, is a woman somewhat cold in manner, slightly pretentious, but full of noble thoughts. The princess's education may have been neglected, but her principles, I believe, are good. Such, at least, was the opinion I formed of her when she resided in France, but she afterwards returned to England, and I am ignorant what may have occurred there." "What do you mean?" "Simply that there are some heads naturally giddy, which are easily turned by prosperity." "That is the very word, madame. I think the princess rather giddy." "We must not exaggerate, Philip. She is clever and witty, and has a certain amount of coquetry very natural in a young woman; but this defect in persons of high rank and position is a great advantage at a court. A princess who is tinged with coquetry usually forms a brilliant court. Her smile stimulates luxury, arouses wit, and even courage. The nobles, too, fight better for a prince whose wife is beautiful." "Thank you extremely, madame," said Philip, with some temper. "You really have drawn some very alarming pictures for me." "In what respect?" asked the queen, with pretended simplicity. "You know, madame," said Philip, dolefully, "whether I had or had not a very great dislike to getting married." "Now, indeed, you alarm me. You have some serious cause of complaint against madame?" "I do not precisely say it is serious." "In that case, then, throw aside your doleful looks. If you show yourself to others in your present state, people will take you for a very unhappy husband." "The fact is," replied Philip, "I am not altogether satisfied as a husband, and I shall not be sorry if others know it." "For shame, Philip." "Well, then, madame, I will tell you frankly that I do not understand the life I am required to lead." "Explain yourself." "My wife does not seem to belong to me. She is always leaving me for some reason or another. In the mornings there are visits, correspondences, and toilettes; in the evenings, balls and concerts." "You are jealous, Philip." "I? Heaven forbid! Let others act the part of a jealous husband, not I; but I am annoyed." "All these things you reproach your wife with are perfectly innocent, and so long as you have nothing of greater importance Yet, listen, without being very blamable, a woman can excite a good deal of uneasiness. certain visitors may be received, certain preferences shown, which expose young women to remark, and which are enough to drive out of their senses even those husbands who are least disposed to be jealous. Ah, now we are coming to the real point at last, and not without some difficulty. You speak of frequent visits and certain preferences. Very good. For the last hour we have been beating about the bush, and at last you have broached the true question. Well, then, yes. This is more serious than I thought. It is possible, then, that Madame can have given you grounds for these complaints against her? Precisely so. What, your wife, married only 4 days ago, prefers some other person to yourself? Take care, Philip, you exaggerate your grievances. In wishing to prove everything, you prove nothing. The prince, bewildered by his mother's serious manner, wished to reply, but he could only stammer out some unintelligible words. You draw back, then? Said Anne of Austria. I prefer that, as it is an acknowledgement of your mistake. No, exclaimed Philip, I do not draw back, and I will prove all I asserted. I spoke of preference and of visits, did I not? Well, listen. Anne of Austria prepared herself to listen with that love of gossip which the best woman living, and the best mother, were she a queen even, always finds in being mixed up with the petty squabbles of a household. Well, said Philip, tell me one thing. What is that? Why does my wife retain an English court about her? Said Philip, as he crossed his arms and looked his mother steadily in the face, as if he were convinced that she could not answer the question. For a very simple reason, returned Anne of Austria. Because the English are her countrymen, because they have expended large sums in order to accompany her to France, and because it would hardly be polite, not politics certainly, to dismiss abruptly those members of the English nobility who have not shrunk from any devotion or sacrifice. A wonderful sacrifice indeed, returned Philip, to desert a wretched country, to come to a beautiful one, where a greater effect can be produced for a guinea than can be procured elsewhere for 4. Extraordinary devotion, really, to travel 100 leagues in company with a woman one is in love with. In love? Philip, think what you are saying. Who is in love with Madame? The Duke of Buckingham. Perhaps you will defend him too. Anne of Austria blushed and smiled at the same time. The name of the Duke of Buckingham recalled certain recollections of a very tender and melancholy nature. The Duke of Buckingham, she murmured. Yes, one of those armchair soldiers. The Buckinghams are loyal and brave, said Anne of Austria courageously. This is too bad. My own mother takes the part of my wife's lover against me, exclaimed Philip, incensed to such an extent that his weak organization was affected almost to tears. Philip, my son, exclaimed Anne of Austria, such an expression is unworthy of you. Your wife has no lover, and had she one, it would not be the Duke of Buckingham. The members of that family, I repeat, are loyal and discreet, and the rights of hospitality are sure to be respected by them. The Duke of Buckingham is an Englishman, madame, said Philip, and may I ask if the English so very religiously respect what belongs to princes of France? Anne blushed a second time, and then turned aside under the pretext of taking her pen from her desk again, but in reality to conceal her confusion from her son. Really, Philip, she said, you seem to discover expressions for the purpose of embarrassing me, and your anger blinds you while it alarms me. Reflect a little. There is no need for reflection, madame. I can see with my own eyes. Well, and what do you see? That Buckingham never quits my wife. He presumes to make presents to her, and she ventures to accept them. Yesterday she was talking about Saucher a la Violette. Well, our French perfumers, you know very well, madame, for you have over and over again asked for it without success. Our French perfumers, I say, have never been able to procure this scent. The duke, however, wore about him a sachet a la violette, and I am sure that the one my wife has came from him." "Indeed, monsieur," said Anne of Austria, "you build your pyramids on needle points. Be careful. What harm, I ask you, can there be in a man giving to his countrywoman a recipe for a new essence? These strange ideas, I protest, painfully recall your father to me, he who so frequently and so unjustly made me suffer." "The Duke of Buckingham's father was probably more reserved and more respectful than his son," said Philip thoughtlessly, not perceiving how deeply he had wounded his mother's feelings. The queen turned pale, and pressed her clenched hands upon her bosom, but recovering herself immediately, she said, "You came here with some intention or another, I suppose?" "Certainly." "What was it?" "I came, madame, intending to complain energetically, and to inform you that I will not submit to such behavior from the Duke of Buckingham." "What do you intend to do, then?" "I shall complain to the king." "And what do you expect the king to reply?" "Very well, then," said Monsieur, with an expression of stern determination on his countenance, which offered a very singular contrast to its usual gentleness. "Very well, I will write myself." "What do you call writing yourself?" inquired Anne of Austria in alarm. "I will have the Duke of Buckingham quit the princess, I will have him quit France, and I will see that my wishes are intimated to him." "You will intimate nothing of the kind, Philip," said the queen; "for if you act in that manner, and violate hospitality to that extent, I will invoke the severity of the king against you." "Do you threaten me, madame?" exclaimed Philip, almost in tears. "Do you threaten me in the midst of my complaints?" "I do not threaten you, I do but place an obstacle in the path of your hasty anger. I maintain that to adopt towards the Duke of Buckingham, or any other Englishman, any rigorous measure, to take even a discourteous step toward him, would be to plunge France and England into the most disastrous disagreement. Can it be possible that a prince of the blood, the brother of the king of France, does not know how to hide an injury, even did it exist in reality, where political necessity requires it?" Philip made a movement. "Besides," continued the queen, "the injury is neither true nor possible; it is merely a matter of silly jealousy." "Madame, I know what I know." "Whatever you may know, I can only advise you to be patient." "I am not patient by disposition, madame." The queen rose, full of severity, and with an icy, ceremonious manner. "Explain what you really require, monsieur," she said. "I do not require anything, madame; I simply express what I desire. If the Duke of Buckingham does not, of his own accord, discontinue his visits to my apartments, I shall forbid him entrance." "That is a point you will refer to the king," said Anne of Austria, her heart swelling as she spoke, and her voice trembling with emotion. "But, madame," exclaimed Philip, striking his hands together, "act as my mother, and not as the queen, since I speak to you as a son. It is simply a matter of a few minutes' conversation between the duke and myself." "It is that very conversation I forbid," said the queen, resuming her authority, "because it is unworthy of you." "Be it so. I will not appear in the matter, but I shall intimate my will to Madame." "Oh!" said the queen mother, with a melancholy arising from reflection, "never tyrannize over a wife, never behave too haughtily or imperiously towards your own. A woman unwillingly convinced is unconvinced." "What is to be done, then? I will consult my friends about it." "Yes, your double dealing advisors, your Chevalier de Lorraine, your De Wardes. Entrust the conduct of this affair to me." You wish the Duke of Buckingham to leave, do you not?" "As soon as possible, madame." "Send the duke to me, then. Smile upon your wife, behave to her, to the king, to every one as usual, but follow no advice but mine. Alas! I too well know what any household comes to that is troubled by advisers." "You shall be obeyed, madame." "And you will be satisfied at the result. Send the duke to me." "That will not be difficult." "Where do you suppose him to be?" "At my wife's door, whose leave he is probably awaiting." "Very well," said Anne of Austria, calmly. "Be good enough to tell the duke that I shall be charmed if he will pay me a visit." Philip kissed his mother's hand, and started off to find the Duke of Buckingham. Chapter 17. Of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 17. Forever. The Duke of Buckingham, obedient to the queen mother's invitation, presented himself in her apartments half an hour after the departure of the Duc d'Orleans. When his name was announced by the gentleman usher in attendance, the queen, who was sitting with her elbow resting on a table and her head buried in her hands, rose and smilingly received the graceful and respectful salutation which the duke addressed to her. Anne of Austria was still beautiful. It is well known that at her then somewhat advanced age, her long auburn hair, perfectly formed hands, and bright ruby lips were still the admiration of all who saw her. On the present occasion, abandoned entirely to a remembrance which evoked all the past in her heart, she looked almost as beautiful as in the days of her youth, when her palace was open to the visits of the Duke of Buckingham's father, then a young and impassioned man, as well as an unfortunate prince, who lived for her alone, and died with her name upon his lips. Anne of Austria fixed upon Buckingham a look so tender in its expression that it denoted not alone the indulgence of maternal affection, but a gentleness of expression like the coquetry of a woman who loves. "Your majesty," said Buckingham, respectfully, "desired to speak to me?" "Yes, duke," said the queen, in English. "Will you be good enough to sit down?" The favor which Anne of Austria thus extended to the young man, and the welcome sound of the language of a country from which the duke had been estranged since his stay in France, deeply affected him. He immediately conjectured that the queen had a request to make of him. After having abandoned the first few moments to the irrepressible emotion she experienced, the queen resumed the smiling air with which she had received him. "What do you think of France?" she said in French. "It's a lovely country, madame," replied the duke. "Had you ever seen it before?" "Once only, madame." "But, like all true Englishmen, you prefer England?" "I prefer my own native land to France," replied the duke; "but if your majesty were to ask me which of the two cities, London or Paris, I should prefer as a residence, I should be forced to answer Paris." Anne of Austria observed the ardent manner with which these words had been pronounced. "I am told, my lord, you have rich possessions in your own country, and that you live in a splendid and time honored place." "It was my father's residence," replied Buckingham, casting down his eyes. "Those are, indeed, great advantages and souvenirs," replied the queen, alluding in spite of herself to recollections from which it is impossible voluntarily to detach one's self. "In fact," said the duke, yielding to the melancholy influence of this opening conversation, "sensitive persons live as much in the past or the future as in the present." "That is very true," said the queen, in a low tone of voice. "It follows, then, my lord," she added, that you, who are a man of feeling, will soon quit France in order to shut yourself up with your wealth and your relics of the past?" Buckingham raised his head and said, "I think not, madame." "What do you mean?" "On the contrary, I think of leaving England in order to take up my residence in France." It was now Anne of Austria's turn to exhibit surprise. "Why," she said, "are you not in favor with the new king?" "Perfectly so, madame, for his majesty's kindness to me is unbounded." "It cannot," said the queen, "be because your fortune has diminished, for it is said to be enormous." "My income, madame, has never been so large." "There is some secret cause, then?" "No, madame," said Buckingham, eagerly, "there is nothing secret in my reason for this determination. I prefer residence in France. I like a court so distinguished by its refinement and courtesy. I like the amusements, somewhat serious in their nature, which are not the amusements of my own country, and which are met with in France." Anne of Austria smiled shrewdly. "Amusements of a serious nature," she said. "Has your grace well reflected on their seriousness?" The duke hesitated. "There is no amusement so serious," continued the queen, "as to prevent a man of your rank." "Your majesty seems to insist greatly on that point," interrupted the duke. "Do you think so, my lord?" "If you will forgive me for saying so, it is the second time you have vaunted the attractions of England at the expense of the delight which all experience who live in France." Anne of Austria approached the young man, and placing her beautiful hand upon his shoulder, which trembled at the touch, said, "Believe me, monsieur, nothing can equal a residence in one's own native country. I have very frequently had occasion to regret Spain. I have lived long, my lord, very long for a woman, and I confess to you that not a year has passed I have not regretted Spain." "Not 1 year, madame?" said the young duke, coldly. "Not one of those years when you reigned queen of beauty, as you still are, indeed?" "A truce to flattery, duke, for I am old enough to be your mother." She emphasized these latter words in a manner and with a gentleness which penetrated Buckingham's heart. "Yes," she said, "I am old enough to be your mother, and for this reason I will give you a word of advice." "That advice being that I should return to London?" he exclaimed. "Yes, my lord." The duke clasped his hands with a terrified gesture which could not fail of its effect upon the queen, already disposed to softer feelings by the tenderness of her own recollections. "It must be so," added the queen. "What!" he again exclaimed, "am I seriously told that I must leave, that I must exile myself, that I am to flee at once?" "Exile yourself, did you say? One would fancy France was your native country." "Madame, the country of those who love is the country of those whom they love." "Not another word, my lord; you forget whom you are addressing." Buckingham threw himself on his knees. "Madame, you are the source of intelligence, of goodness, and of compassion. You are the first person in this kingdom, not only by your rank, but the first person in the world on account of your angelic attributes. I have said nothing, madame. Have I indeed said anything you should answer with such a cruel remark? What have I betrayed?" "You have betrayed yourself," said the queen, in a low tone of voice. "I have said nothing, I know nothing." "You forget you have spoken and thought in the presence of a woman, and besides " "Besides," said the duke, "no one knows you are listening to me." "On the contrary, it is known; you have all the defects and all the qualities of youth." "I have been betrayed or denounced, then?" "By whom?" "By those who at Le Havre had, with infernal perspicacity, read my heart like an open book." "I do not know whom you mean." "M. de Bragelonne, for instance." "I know the name, without being acquainted with the person to whom it belongs. M. de Bragelonne has said nothing." "Who can it be, then? If any one, madame, had had the boldness to notice in me that which I do not myself wish to behold." "What would you do, duke?" "There are secrets which kill those who discover them. He, then, who has discovered your secret, madman that you are, still lives; and what is more, you will not slay him, for he is armed on all sides. He is a husband, a jealous man; he is the second gentleman in France; he is my son, the Duc d'Orleans." The duke turned pale as death. "You are very cruel, madame," he said. "You see, Buckingham," said Anne of Austria, sadly, "how you pass from one extreme to another, and fight with shadows when it would seem so easy to remain at peace with yourself." "If we fight, madame, we die on the field of battle," replied the young man, gently abandoning himself to the most gloomy depression. Anne ran towards him and took him by the hand. "Villiers," she said, in English, with a vehemence of tone which nothing could resist, "what is it you ask? Do you ask a mother to sacrifice her son, a queen to consent to the dishonor of her house? Child that you are, do not dream of it. What! in order to spare your tears, am I to commit these crimes? Villiers, you speak of the dead. The dead, at least, were full of respect and submission. They resigned themselves to an order of exile. They carried their despair away with them in their hearts, like a priceless possession, because the despair was caused by the woman they loved, and because death, thus deceptive, was like a gift of a favor conferred upon them." Buckingham rose, his features distorted, and his hands pressed against his heart. "You are right, madame," he said; "but those of whom you speak had received their order of exile from the lips of the one whom they loved. They were not driven away, they were entreated to leave, and were not laughed at." "No," murmured Anne of Austria, "they were not forgotten." "But who says you are driven away, or that you are exiled? Who says that your devotion will not be remembered? I do not speak on any one's behalf but my own, when I tell you to leave. Do me this kindness, grant me this favor, let me for this also be indebted to one of your name." "It is for your sake, then, madame?" "For mine alone." "No one whom I shall leave behind me will venture to mock? No prince, even, who shall say, 'I required it'?" "Listen to me, duke," and hereupon the dignified features of the queen assumed a solemn expression. "I swear to you that no one commands in this matter but myself. I swear to you that not only shall no one either laugh or boast in any way, but no one even shall fail in the respect due to your rank. Rely upon me, duke, as I rely upon you." "You do not explain yourself, madame. My heart is full of bitterness, and I am in utter despair. No consolation, however gentle and affectionate, can afford me relief." "Do you remember your mother, duke?" replied the queen, with a winning smile. "Very slightly, madame, yet I remember how she used to cover me with her caresses and her tears whenever I wept." "Villiers," murmured the queen, passing her arm round the young man's neck, "look upon me as your mother, and believe that no one shall ever make my son weep." "I thank you, madame," said the young man, affected and almost suffocated by his emotion. "I feel there is still room in my heart for a gentler and nobler sentiment than love." The queen mother looked at him and pressed his hand. "Go," she said. "When must I leave? Command me." "At any time that may suit you, my lord," resumed the queen. "You will choose your own day of departure. Instead, however, of setting off to day, as you would doubtless wish to do, or to morrow, as others may have expected, leave the day after to morrow, in the evening. but announce today that it is your wish to leave." "My wish?" murmured the young duke. "Yes, duke." "And shall I never return to France?" Anne of Austria reflected for a moment, seemingly absorbed in sad and serious thought. "It would be a consolation for me," she said, "if you were to return on the day when I shall be carried to my final resting place at Saint Denis, beside the king my husband." "Madame, you are goodness itself. The tide of prosperity is setting in on you, your cup brims over with happiness, and many long years are yet before you." "In that case you will not come for some time, then?" said the queen, endeavoring to smile. "I shall not return," said Buckingham, "young as I am. Death does not reckon by years; it is impartial. Some die young, some reach old age." "I will not harbor any sorrowful ideas, duke. Let me comfort you. Return in 2 years. I perceive from your face that the very idea which saddens you so much now will have disappeared before 6 months have passed, and will be not only dead, but forgotten in the period of absence I have assigned you." "I think you judged me better a little while ago, madame," replied the young man, "when you said that time is powerless against members of the family of Buckingham." "Silence," said the queen, kissing the duke upon the forehead with an affection she could not restrain. "Go, go, spare me, and forget yourself no longer. I am the queen, you are the subject of the king of England. King Charles awaits your return. Adieu, Villiers, farewell." "Forever," replied the young man, and he fled, endeavoring to master his emotions. Anne leaned her head upon her hands, and then looking at herself in the glass, murmured, "It has been truly said that a woman who is truly loved is always young, and that the bloom of the girl of 20 years ever lies concealed in some secret cloister of the heart." Chapter 17. Of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 18. King Louis XIV does not think Mademoiselle de la Valliere either rich enough or pretty enough for a gentleman of the rank of the Vicomte of Bragelonne. Raoul and the Comte de la Fere reached Paris the evening of the same day on which Buckingham had held the conversation with the queen mother. The count had scarcely arrived when, through Raoul, he solicited an audience of the king. His majesty had passed a portion of the morning in looking over with Madame and the ladies of the court various goods of Lyons manufacture, of which he had made his sister-in-law a present. A court dinner had succeeded, then cards, and afterwards, according to his usual custom, the king, leaving the card tables at 8 o'clock, passed into his cabinet in order to work with M. Colbert and M. Fouquet. Raoul entered the antechamber at the very moment the two ministers quitted it, and the king, perceiving him through the half closed door, said, "What do you want, M. de Bragelonne?" The young man approached. "An audience, sire," he replied, "for the Comte de la Fere, who has just arrived from Blois, and is most anxious to have an interview with your majesty." "I have an hour to spare between cards and supper," said the king. "Is the Comte de la Fere at hand?" "He is below, and awaits your majesty's permission." "Let him come up at once," said the king. And 5 minutes afterwards Athos entered the presence of Louis XIV. He was received by the king with that gracious kindness of manner which Louis, with a tact beyond his years, reserved for the purpose of gaining those who were not to be conquered by ordinary favors. "Let me hope, comte," said the king, "that you have come to ask me for something." "I will not conceal from your majesty," replied the comte, that I am indeed come for that purpose." "That is well," said the king joyously. "It is not for myself, sire." "So much the worse; but, at least, I will do for your protege what you refuse to permit me to do for you." "Your majesty encourages me. I have come to speak on behalf of the Vicomte de Bragelonne." "It is the same as if you spoke on your own behalf, comte." "Not altogether so, sire. I am desirous of obtaining for your majesty that which I cannot ask for myself. The vicomte thinks of marrying. He is still very young, but that does not matter. He is an eminently distinguished man. I will choose a wife for him." "He has already chosen one, sire, and only awaits your consent." "It is only a question, then, of signing the marriage contract?" Athos bowed. "Has he chose a wife whose fortune and position accord with your own anticipation?" Athos hesitated for a moment. "His affirmed wife is of good birth, but has no fortune." "That is a misfortune we can remedy." "You overwhelm me with gratitude, sire, but your majesty will permit me to offer a remark?" "Do so, comte." "Your majesty seems to intimate an intention of giving a marriage portion to this young lady." "Certainly." "I should regret, sire, if the step I have taken toward your majesty should be attended by this result." "No false delicacy, comte. What is the bride's name?" "Mademoiselle de la Baume le Blanc de la Valliere," said Athos, coldly. "I seem to know that name," said the king, as if reflecting. "There was a Marquis de la Valliere." "Yes, sire, it is his daughter." "But he died, and his widow married again. M. de Saint Remy, I think, steward of the dowager Madame's household." "Your majesty is correctly informed." "More than that, the young lady has lately become one of the princess's maids of honor." "Your majesty is better acquainted with her history than am I." The king again reflected, and glancing at the comte's anxious countenance, said, "The young lady does not seem to me to be a very pretty, comte." "I am not quite sure," replied Athos. "I have seen her, but she hardly struck me as being so." "She seems to be a good and modest girl, but has little beauty, sire." "Beautiful fair hair, however." "I think so." "And her blue eyes are tolerably good." "Yes, sire." "With regard to her beauty, then, the match is but an ordinary one. Now for the money side of the question." 15 to 20,000 francs dowry at the very outset, sire. The lovers are disinterested enough. For myself, I care little for money." "For superfluity, you mean; but a needful amount is of importance. With 15,000 francs, without landed property, a woman cannot live at court. We will make up the deficiency. I will do it for De Bragelonne." The king again remarked the coldness with which Athos received the remark. "Let us pass from the question of money to that of rank," said Louis XIV. "The daughter of the Marquis de la Valliere, that is well enough; but there is that excellent Saint Remy, who somewhat damages the credit of the family; and you, comte, are rather particular, I believe, about your own family." "Sire, I no longer hold to anything but my devotion to your majesty." The king again paused. "A moment, comte; you have surprised me in no little degree from the beginning of your conversation. You came to ask me to authorize a marriage. and you seem greatly disturbed in having to make the request. Nay, pardon me, comte, but I am rarely deceived, young as I am; for while with some persons I place my friendship at the disposal of my understanding, with others I call my distrust to my aid, by which my discernment is increased. I repeat that you do not prefer your request as though you wished its success." "Well, sire, that is true." "I do not understand you, then. Refuse." "Nay, sire, I love De Bragelonne with my whole heart. He is smitten with Mademoiselle de la Valliere. He weaves dreams of bliss for the future. I am not one who is willing to destroy the illusions of youth. This marriage is objectionable to me, but I implore your majesty to consent to it forthwith, and thus make Raoul happy." "Tell me, comte, is she in love with him?" "If your majesty requires me to speak candidly, I do not believe in Mademoiselle de la Valliere's affection. The delight at being at court, the honor of being in the service of Madame, counteract in her head whatever affection she may happen to have in her heart. It is a marriage similar to many others which already exist at court, but De Bragelonne wishes it, and so let it be." "And yet you do not resemble those easy tempered fathers who volunteer as stepping stones for their children," said the king. "I am determined enough against the viciously disposed, but not so against men of upright character. Raoul is suffering, he is in great distress of mind. His disposition, naturally light and cheerful, has become gloomy and melancholy. I do not wish to deprive your majesty of the services he may be able to render." "I understand you," said the king, "and what is more, I understand your heart too, comte." "There is no occasion, therefore," replied the comte, "to tell your majesty that my object is to make these children, or rather Raoul, happy." "And I, too, as much as yourself, comte, wish to secure M. de Bragelonne's happiness." "I only await your majesty's signature. Raoul will have the honor of presenting himself before your majesty to receive your consent." "You are mistaken, comte," said the king, firmly. "I have just said that I desire to secure M. de Bragelonne's happiness, and from the present moment, therefore, I oppose his marriage." "But, sire," exclaimed Athos, "your majesty has promised." "Not so, comte. I did not promise you, for it is opposed to my own views." "I appreciate your majesty's considerate and generous intentions on my behalf, but I take the liberty of recalling to you that I undertook to approach you as an ambassador." "An ambassador, comte, frequently asks, but does not always obtain what he asks." "But, sire, it will be such a blow for De Bragelonne." "My hand shall deal the blow. I will speak to the vicomte." "Love, sire, is overwhelming in its might." "Love can be resisted, comte. I myself can assure you of that." "When one has the soul of a king, your own, for instance, sire." "Do not make yourself uneasy on the subject. I have certain views for De Bragelonne. I do not say that he shall not marry Mademoiselle de la Valliere, but I do not wish him to marry so young. I do not wish him to marry her until she has acquired a fortune, and he, on his side, no less deserves favor, such as I wish to confer upon him. In a word, comte, I wish them to wait." "Yet once more, sire." "Comte, you told me you came here to request a favor." "Assuredly, sire." "Grant me one, then, instead. Let us speak no longer upon this matter. It is probable that before long war may be declared. I require men about me who are unfettered. I should hesitate to send under fire a married man, or a father of a family. I should hesitate also on De Bragelonne's account to endow with a fortune, without some sound reason for it, a young girl, a perfect stranger. Such an act would sow jealousy amongst my nobility." Athos bowed and remained silent. "Is that all you wish to ask me?" added Louis XIV. "Absolutely all, sire, and I take my leave of your majesty. Is it, however, necessary that I should inform Raoul?" "Spare yourself the trouble and annoyance. Tell the vicomte that at my levee to morrow morning I will speak to him. I shall expect you this evening, comte, to join my card table. I am in traveling costume, sire. A day will come, I hope, when you will leave me no more. Before long, comte, the monarchy will be established in such a manner as to enable me to offer a worthy hospitality to men of your merit. Provided, sire, a monarch reigns grandly in the hearts of his subjects, the palace he inhabits matters little, since he is worshipped in a temple." With these words Athos left the cabinet and found De Bragelonne, who was awaiting him anxiously. "Well, monsieur?" said the young man. "The king, Raoul, is well intentioned towards us both, not perhaps in the sense you suppose, but he is kind and generously disposed to our house." "You have bad news to communicate to me, monsieur," said the young man, turning very pale. "The king himself will inform you to morrow morning that it is not bad news." "The king has not signed, however." "The king wishes himself to settle the terms of the contract, and he desires to make it so grand that he requires time for consideration. Throw the blame rather on your own impatience than on the king's good feelings towards you." Raoul, in utter consternation on account of his knowledge of the count's frankness as well as his diplomacy, remained plunged in dull and gloomy stupor. "Will you not go with me to my lodgings?" said Athos. "I beg your pardon, monsieur, I will follow you," he stammered out, following Athos down the staircase. "Since I am here," said Athos, suddenly, "cannot I see M. d'Artagnan?" "Shall I show you his apartments?" said De Bragelonne. "Do so." "They are on the opposite staircase." They altered their course, but on reaching the landing of the grand staircase, Raoul perceived a servant in the Comte de Guiche's livery, who ran towards him as soon as he heard his voice. "What is it?" said Raoul. "This note, monsieur. My master heard of your return, and wrote to you without delay. I have been looking for you the last half hour." Raoul approached Athos as he unsealed the letter, saying, "With your permission, monsieur?" "Certainly." "Dear Raoul," wrote the Comte de Guiche, "I have an affair in hand which requires immediate attention. I know you have returned. Come to me as soon as possible." Hardly had he finished reading it when the servant in the livery of the Duke of Buckingham, turning out of the gallery, recognized Raoul and approached him respectfully, saying, "From his grace, monsieur." "Well, Raoul, as I see you are already as busy as a general of an army, I shall leave you, and will find M. d'Artagnan myself." "You will excuse me, I trust," said Raoul. "Yes, yes, I excuse you. Adieu, Raoul. You will find me at my apartments until to morrow. During the day I may set out for Blois, unless I have orders to the contrary." "I shall present my respects to you to morrow, monsieur." As soon as Athos had left, Raoul opened Buckingham's letter. "Monsieur de Bragelonne," it ran, "you are, of all the Frenchmen I have known, the one with whom I am most pleased. I am about to put your friendship to the proof. I have received a certain message written in very good French. As I am an Englishman, I am afraid of not comprehending it very clearly. The letter has a good name attached to it, and that is all I can tell you. Will you be good enough to come and see me? For I am told you have arrived from Blois. your devoted Villiers, Duke of Buckingham. I am going now to see your master," said Raoul to De Guiche's servant, as he dismissed him; "and I shall be with the Duke of Buckingham in an hour," he added, dismissing with these words the duke's messenger. Chapter 18.
Of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 19. Sword Thrusts in the Water. Raoul, on betaking himself to De Guiche, found him conversing with De Wardes and Manicamp. De Wardes, since the affair of the barricade, had treated Raoul as a stranger. They behaved as if they were not acquainted. As Raoul entered, De Guiche walked up to him, and Raoul, as he grasped his friend's hand, glanced rapidly at his two companions, hoping to be able to read on their faces what was passing in their minds. De Wardes was cold and impenetrable. Manicamp seemed absorbed in the contemplation of some trimming to his dress. De Guiche led Raoul to an adjoining cabinet, and made him sit down, saying, "How well you look!" "That is singular," replied Raoul, "for I am far from being in good spirits." "Is it your case, then, Raoul, as it is my own? Our love affairs do not progress?" "So much the better, Count, as far as you are concerned. The worst news would be good news." "In that case, do not distress yourself, for not only am I very unhappy, but what is more, I see others about me who are happy." "Really? I do not understand you," replied Raoul. "Explain yourself." "You will soon learn. I have tried, but in vain, to overcome the feeling you saw dawn in me, increase, and take entire possession of me. I have summoned all your advice and my own strength to my aid. I have well weighed the unfortunate affair in which I have embarked. I have sounded its depths. That it is an abyss, I am aware, but it matters little, for I shall pursue my own course." "This is madness, De Guiche. You cannot advance another step without risking your own ruin today, perhaps your life tomorrow." "Whatever may happen, I have done with reflections. Listen." "And you hope to succeed? You believe that Madame will love you?" "Raoul, I believe nothing. I hope, because hope exists in man, and never abandons him until death." "But, admitting that you obtain the happiness you covet, even then, you are more certainly lost than if you had failed in obtaining it." "I beseech you, Raoul, not to interrupt me any more. You could never convince me, for I tell you beforehand, I do not wish to be convinced. I have gone so far I cannot recede. I have suffered so much, death itself would be a boon. I no longer love to madness, Raoul. I am being engulfed by a whirlpool of jealousy." Raoul struck his hands together with an expression resembling anger. "Well?" he said. "Well or ill matters little. This is what I claim from you, my friend, my almost brother. During the last 3 days, Madame has been living in a perfect intoxication of gaiety. On the first day I dared not look at her. I hated her for not being as unhappy as myself. The next day I could not bear her out of my sight, and she, Raoul, at least I thought I remarked it, she looked at me, if not with pity, at least with gentleness. But between her looks and mine a shadow intervened, another's smile invited hers. Beside her horse another's always gallops, which is not mine. In her ear another's caressing voice, not mine, unceasingly vibrates. Raoul, for 3 days past, my brain has been on fire. Flame, not blood, courses through my veins. That shadow must be driven away. That smile must be quenched. That voice must be silenced." "You wish Monsieur's death?" exclaimed Raoul. "No, no, I am not jealous of the husband. I am jealous of the lover." "Of the lover?" said Raoul. "Have you not observed it? You who were formerly so keen-sighted. Are you jealous of the Duke of Buckingham?" "To the very death." "Again jealous?" "This time the affair will be easy to arrange between us. I have taken the initiative, and have sent him a letter." "It was you, then, who wrote to him?" "How do you know that?" "I know it because he told me so. Look at this." And he handed De Guiche the letter he had received nearly at the same moment as his own. De Guiche read it eagerly, and said, "He is a brave man, and more than that, a gallant man." "Most certainly the duke is a gallant man. I need not ask if you wrote to him in a similar style. He will show you my letter when you call on him on my behalf." "But that is almost out of the question." "What is?" "That I shall call on him for that purpose." "Why so?" "The duke consults me as you do." "I suppose you will give me the preference. Listen to me, Raoul. I wish you to tell his Grace, it is a very simple matter, that today, tomorrow, the following day, or any other day he may choose, I will meet him at Vincennes." "Reflect, De Guiche." "I thought I told you I have reflected. The duke is a stranger here, he is on a mission which renders his person inviolable. Vincennes is close to the Bastile. The consequences concern me." "But the motive for this meeting? What motive do you wish me to assign?" "Be perfectly easy on that score. He will not ask why. The duke must be as sick of me as I am of him. I implore you, therefore, seek the duke, and if it is necessary to entreat him to accept my offer, I will do so." "That is useless. The duke has already informed me that he wishes to speak to me. The duke is now playing cards with the king. Let us both go there. I will draw him aside in the gallery. You will remain aloof. 2 words will be sufficient." "That is well arranged. I will take De Wardes to keep me in countenance." "Why not Manicamp? De Wardes can join us at any time. We can leave him here." "Yes, that is true." "He knows nothing?" "Positively nothing." "You continue still on an unfriendly footing, then?" "Has he not told you anything?" "Nothing." "I do not like the man, and as I never liked him, the result is that I am on no worse terms with him to-day than I was yesterday." "Let us go, then." The 4 descended the stairs. De Guiche's carriage was waiting at the door, and took them to the Palais Royal. As they were going along, Raoul was engaged in devising his scheme of action. The sole depository of 2 secrets, he did not despair of concluding some arrangement between the 2 parties. He knew the influence he exercised over Buckingham, and the ascendancy he had acquired over De Guiche, and affairs did not look utterly hopeless. On their arrival in the gallery, dazzling with a blaze of light, where the most beautiful and illustrious women of the court moved to and fro, like stars in their own atmosphere, Raoul could not prevent himself for a moment forgetting De Guiche in order to seek out Louise, who, amidst her companions, like a dove completely fascinated, gazed long and fixedly upon the royal circle, which glittered with jewels and gold. All its members were standing, the king alone being seated. Raoul perceived Buckingham, who was standing a few paces from Monsieur, in a group of French and English, who were admiring his aristocratic carriage and the incomparable magnificence of his costume. Some of the older courtiers remembered having seen his father, but their recollections were not prejudicial to the son. Buckingham was conversing with Fouquet, who was talking with him aloud about Belle Isle. "I cannot speak to him at present," said Raoul. "Wait, then, and choose your opportunity, but finish everything speedily. I am on thorns." "See, our deliverer approaches," said Raoul, perceiving D'Artagnan, who, magnificently dressed in his new uniform of captain of the Musketeers, had just made his entry in the gallery, and he advanced towards D'Artagnan. "The Comte de la Fere has been looking for you, chevalier," said Raoul. "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "I have just left him." "I thought you would have passed a portion of the evening together." "We have arranged to meet again." As he answered Raoul, his absent looks were directed on all sides, as if seeking some one in the crowd, or looking for something in the room. Suddenly his gaze became fixed, like that of an eagle on its prey. Raoul followed the direction of his glance, and he noticed that De Guiche and D'Artagnan saluted each other, but he could not distinguish at whom the captain's lingering and haughty glance was aimed. "Chevalier," said Raoul, "there is no one here but yourself who can render me a service." "What is it, my dear Vicomte?" "It is simply to go and interrupt the Duke of Buckingham, to whom I wish to say 2 words; and, as the duke is conversing with M. Fouquet, you understand that it would not do for me to throw myself into the middle of the conversation." "Aha! Is M. Fouquet there?" inquired D'Artagnan. "Do you not see him?" "Yes, now I do. But do you think I have a greater right than you have?" "You are a more important personage." "Yes, you're right. I am captain of the musketeers. I have had the post promised me so long, and have enjoyed it for so brief a period, that I am always forgetting my dignity. You will do me this service, will you not?" "Monsieur Fouquet, the deuce!" "Are you not on good terms with him?" "It is rather he who may not be on good terms with me. However, since it must be done some day or another. Stay, I think he is looking at you. Or is it likely that it might be? No, no, don't deceive yourself. It is indeed me for whom this honor is intended." "The opportunity is a good one, then." "Do you think so? Pray go." "Well, I will." De Guiche had not removed his eyes from Raoul, who made a sign to him that all was arranged. D'Artagnan walked straight up to the group, and civilly saluted M. Fouquet as well as the others. "Good evening, Monsieur d'Artagnan. We were speaking of Belle Isle," said Fouquet, with that usage of society and that perfect knowledge of the language of looks which require half a lifetime thoroughly to acquire, and which some persons, notwithstanding all their study, never attain. "Of Belle Isle en Mer? Ah!" said D'Artagnan, "it belongs to you, I believe, Monsieur Fouquet?" "Monsieur Fouquet has just told us that he had presented it to the king," said Buckingham. "Do you know Belle Isle, chevalier?" inquired Fouquet. "I have only been there once," replied D'Artagnan, with readiness and good humor. "Did you remain there long?" "Scarcely a day." "Did you see much of it while you were there?" "All that could be seen in a day." "A great deal can be seen with observation as keen as yours," said Fouquet, at which D'Artagnan bowed. During this, Raoul made a sign to Buckingham. "Monsieur Fouquet," said Buckingham, "I leave the captain with you. He is more learned than I am in bastions, scarps, and counterscarps, and I will join one of my friends, who has just beckoned me." Saying this, Buckingham disengaged himself from the group, and advanced towards Raoul, stopping for a moment at the table where the queen mother, the young queen, and the king were playing together. "Now, Raoul," said De Guiche, "there he is. Be firm and quick." Buckingham, having made some complimentary remark to Madame, continued his way towards Raoul, who advanced to meet him, while De Guiche remained in his place, though he followed him with his eyes. The maneuver was so arranged that the young men met in an open space which was left vacant, between the groups of players and the gallery, where they walked, stopping now and then for the purpose of saying a few words to some of the graver courtiers who were walking there. At the moment when the two lines were about to unite, they were broken by a third. It was Monsieur who advanced towards the Duke of Buckingham. Monsieur had his most engaging smile on his red and perfumed lips. "My dear Duke," said he, with the most affectionate politeness, "is it really true what I have just been told?" Buckingham turned round. He had not noticed Monsieur approach, but had merely heard his voice. He started in spite of his command over himself, and a slight pallor overspread his face. "Monsieur," he asked, "what has been told you that surprises you so much?" "That which throws me into despair, and will, in truth, be a real cause of mourning for the whole court." "Your highness is very kind, for I perceive that you allude to my departure." "Precisely." Guiche had overheard the conversation from where he was standing, and started in his turn. "His departure!" he murmured. "What does he say?" Philip continued with the same gracious air. "I can easily conceive, monsieur, why the king of Great Britain recalls you. We all know that King Charles II, who appreciates true gentlemen, cannot dispense with you. But it cannot be supposed we can let you go without great regret, and I beg you to receive the expression of my own." "Believe me, monseigneur," said the duke, "that if I quit the court of France—" "Because you are recalled; but if you suppose the expression of my own wish on the subject might possibly have any influence with the king, I will gladly volunteer to entreat his majesty Charles II to leave you with us a little while longer." "I am overwhelmed, monseigneur, by so much kindness," replied Buckingham; "but I have received positive commands. My residence in France was limited. I have prolonged it at the risk of displeasing my gracious sovereign. It is only this very day that I recollected I ought to have set off 4 days ago." "Indeed," said Monsieur. "Yes, but," added Buckingham, raising his voice in such a manner that the princess could hear him, "but I resemble that dweller in the East, who turned mad, and remained so for several days, owing to a delightful dream that he had had, but who one day awoke, if not completely cured, in some respects rational at least. The court of France has its intoxicating properties, which are not unlike this dream, my lord. But at last I wake and leave it. I shall be unable, therefore, to prolong my residence, as your highness has so kindly invited me to do." "When do you leave?" inquired Philip, with an expression full of interest. "To-morrow, monseigneur. My carriages have been ready for 3 days." The Duc d'Orleans made a movement of the head, which seemed to signify, "Since you are determined, duke, there is nothing to be said." Buckingham returned the gesture, concealing under a smile a contraction of his heart, and then Monsieur moved away in the same direction by which he had approached. At the same moment, however, De Guiche advanced from the opposite direction. Raoul feared that the impatient young man might possibly make the proposition himself, and hurried forth before him. "No, no, Raoul, all is useless now," said Guiche, holding both his hands towards the duke, and leading him behind a column. "Forgive me, duke, for what I wrote to you. I was mad. Give me back my letter." "It is true," said the duke. "You cannot owe me a grudge any longer now." "Forgive me, duke. My friendship, my lasting friendship, is yours. There is certainly no reason why you should bear me any ill will, from the moment I leave her, never to see her again." Raoul heard these words, and comprehending that his presence was now useless between the young men, who had now only friendly words to exchange, withdrew a few paces, a movement which brought him closer to De Wardes, who was conversing with the Chevalier de Lorraine respecting the departure of Buckingham. "A strategic retreat," said De Wardes. "Why so?" "Because the dear duke saves a sword thrust by it." At which reply both laughed. Raoul, indignant, turned round frowningly, flushed with anger, and his lip curling with disdain. The Chevalier de Lorraine turned on his heel, but De Wardes remained and waited. "You will not break yourself of the habit," said Raoul to De Wardes, "of insulting the absent. Yesterday it was Monsieur d'Artagnan, to-day it is the Duke of Buckingham." "You know very well, monsieur," returned De Wardes, "that I sometimes insult those who are present." De Wardes was close to Raoul. Their shoulders met, their faces approached, as if to mutually inflame each other by the fire of their looks and of their anger. It could be seen that the one was at the height of fury, the other at the end of his patience. Suddenly a voice was heard behind them, full of grace and courtesy, saying, "I believe I heard my name pronounced." They turned round and saw D'Artagnan, who, with a smiling eye and a cheerful face, had just placed his hand on De Wardes's shoulder. Raoul stepped back to make room for the musketeer. De Wardes trembled from head to foot, turned pale, but did not move. D'Artagnan, still with the same smile, took the place which Raoul had abandoned to him. "Thank you, my dear Raoul," he said. "Monsieur de Wardes, I wish to talk with you." "Do not leave us, Raoul. Every one can hear what I have to say to Monsieur de Wardes." His smile immediately faded away, and his gaze became cold and sharp as a sword. "I am at your orders, monsieur," said De Wardes. "For a very long time," resumed D'Artagnan, "I have sought an opportunity of conversing with you. To-day is the first time I have found it. The place is badly chosen, I admit, but you will perhaps have the goodness to accompany me to my apartments, which are on the staircase at the end of this gallery." "I follow you, monsieur," said De Wardes. "Are you alone here?" said D'Artagnan. "No, I have M. Manicamp and M. de Guiche, two of my friends." "That's well," said D'Artagnan, "but two persons are not sufficient. You will be able to find a few others, I trust." "Certainly," said the young man, who did not know what object D'Artagnan had in view. "As many as you please. Are they friends?" "Yes, monsieur." "Real friends?" "No doubt of it." "Very well, get a good supply then. Do you come too, Raoul. Bring M. de Guiche and the Duke of Buckingham." "What a disturbance!" replied De Wardes, attempting to smile. The captain slightly signed to him with his hand, as though to recommend him to be patient, and then led the way to his apartments. Chapter 20.
Of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eden Rehedrick. 10 Years Later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 20. Sword thrusts in the water. Concluded. D'Artagnan's apartment was not occupied, for the Comte de la Fere, seated in the recess of a window, awaited him. "Well," said he to D'Artagnan, as he saw him enter. "Well," said the latter, "Monsieur de Wardes has done me the honor to pay me a visit, in company with some of his own friends, as well as of ours." In fact, behind the musketeer appeared De Wardes and Manicamp, followed by De Guiche and Buckingham, who looked surprised, not knowing what was expected of them. Raoul was accompanied by 2 or 3 gentlemen, and, as he entered, glanced round the room, and, perceiving the count, he went and placed himself by his side. D'Artagnan received his visitors with all the courtesy he was capable of; he preserved his unmoved and unconcerned look. All the persons present were men of distinction, occupying posts of honor and credit at the court. After he had apologized to each of them for any inconvenience he might have put them to, he turned toward De Wardes, who, in spite of his customary self-command, could not prevent his face betraying some surprise, mingled with not a little uneasiness. "Now, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "since we are no longer within the precincts of the king's palace, and since we can speak out without failing in respect to propriety, I will inform you why I have taken the liberty to request you to visit me here, and why I have invited these gentlemen to be present at the same time. My friend the Comte de la Fere has acquainted me with the injurious reports you are spreading about myself. You have stated that you regard me as your mortal enemy, because I was, so you affirm, that of your father." "Perfectly true, monsieur, I have said so," replied De Wardes, whose pallid face became slightly tinged with color. "You accuse me, therefore, of a crime, or a fault, or of some mean and cowardly act. Have the goodness to state your charge against me in precise terms." "In the presence of witnesses?" "Most certainly in the presence of witnesses, and you see I have selected them as being experienced in affairs of honor." "You do not appreciate my delicacy, monsieur. I have accused you, it is true, but I have kept the nature of the accusation a perfect secret. I entered into no details, but have rested satisfied by expressing my hatred in the presence of those on whom a duty was almost imposed to acquaint you with it. You have not taken the discreetness I have shown into consideration, although you were interested in remaining silent. I can hardly recognize your habitual prudence in that, Monsieur d'Artagnan." D'Artagnan, who was quietly biting the corner of his mustache, said, "I have already had the honor to beg you to state the particulars of the grievances you say you have against me." "Aloud?" "Certainly aloud." "In that case, I will speak." "Speak, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, bowing. "We are all listening to you." "Well, monsieur, it is not a question of a personal injury towards myself, but one towards my father." "That you have already stated." "Yes, but there are certain subjects which are only approached with hesitation." "If that hesitation, in your case, really does exist, I entreat you to overcome it." "Even if it refer to a disgraceful action?" "Yes, in every and any case." Those who were present at this scene had, at first, looked at each other with a good deal of uneasiness. They were reassured, however, when they saw that D'Artagnan manifested no emotion whatever. De Wardes still maintained the same unbroken silence. "Speak, monsieur," said the musketeer. "You see you are keeping us waiting." "Listen, then. My father loved a lady of noble birth, and this lady loved my father." D'Artagnan and Athos exchanged looks. De Wardes continued. "Monsieur d'Artagnan found some letters which indicated a rendezvous, substituted himself, under disguise, for the person who was expected, and took advantage of the darkness." "That is perfectly true," said D'Artagnan. A slight murmur was heard from those present. "Yes, I was guilty of that dishonorable action. You should have added, monsieur, since you are so impartial, that, at the period when the circumstance you have just related happened, I was not 21 years of age." A renewed murmur was heard, but this time of astonishment, and almost of doubt. "It was a most shameful deception, I admit," said D'Artagnan, "and I have not waited for M. de Wardes's reproaches to reproach myself for it, and very bitterly too. Age has, however, made me more reasonable, and above all, more upright, and this injury has been atoned for by a long and lasting regret. But I appeal to you, gentlemen. This affair took place in 1626, at a period, happily for yourselves, known to you by tradition only, at a period when love was not over scrupulous, when consciences did not distill, as in the present day, poison and bitterness. We were young soldiers, always fighting or being attacked, our swords always in our hands, or at least ready to be drawn from their sheaths. Death then always stared us in the face, war hardened us, and the cardinal pressed us sorely. I have repented of it, and more than that, I still repent it, M. de Wardes." "I can well understand that, monsieur, for the action itself needed repentance, but you were not the less the cause of that lady's disgrace. She of whom you have been speaking, covered with shame, borne down by the affront you brought upon her, fled, quitted France, and no one ever knew what became of her." "Stay," said the Comte de la Fere, stretching his hand towards De Wardes with a peculiar smile upon his face. "You are mistaken. She was seen, and there are persons even now present who, having often heard her spoken of, will easily recognize her by the description I am about to give. She was about 25 years of age, slender in form, of a pale complexion, and fair haired. She was married in England." "Married!" exclaimed De Wardes. "So you were not aware she was married? You see we are far better informed than yourself. Do you happen to know she was usually styled 'my lady,' without the addition of any name to that description?" "Yes, I know that." "Good heavens!" murmured Buckingham. "Very well, monsieur. That woman, who came from England, returned to England after having thrice attempted M. d'Artagnan's life. That was but just, you will say, since M. d'Artagnan had insulted her. But that which was not just was that, when in England, this woman, by her seductions, completely enslaved a young man in the service of Lord de Winter, by name Felton. You change color, my lord," said Athos, turning to the Duke of Buckingham, "and your eyes kindle with anger and sorrow. Let your grace finish the recital then, and tell M. de Wardes who this woman was who placed the knife in the hand of your father's murderer." A cry escaped from the lips of all present. The young duke passed his handkerchief across his forehead, which was covered with perspiration. A dead silence ensued among the spectators. "You see, M. de Wardes," said D'Artagnan, whom this recital had impressed more and more, as his own recollections revived as Athos spoke, "you see that my crime did not cause the destruction of anyone's soul, and that the soul in question may fairly be considered to have been altogether lost before my regret. It is, however, an action of conscience on my part. Now this matter is settled, therefore, it remains for me to ask, with the greatest humility, your forgiveness for this shameless action, as most certainly I should have asked it of your father, if he were still alive, and if I had met him after my return to France, subsequent to the death of King Charles I." "This is too much, Monsieur d'Artagnan!" exclaimed many voices with animation. "No, gentlemen," said the captain. "And now, M. de Wardes, I hope all is finished between us, and that you will have no further occasion to speak ill of me again. Do you consider it completely settled?" De Wardes bowed and muttered to himself inarticulately. "I trust also," said D'Artagnan, approaching the young man closely, "that you will no longer speak ill of anyone, as it seems you have the unfortunate habit of doing; for a man so puritanically conscientious as you are, who can reproach an old soldier for a youthful freak 35 years after it happened, will allow me to ask whether you, who advocate such excessive purity of conscience, will undertake on your side to do nothing contrary either to conscience or to the principle of honor. And now, listen attentively to what I am going to say, M. de Wardes, in conclusion. Take care that no tale with which your name may be associated reaches my ear." "Monsieur," said De Wardes, "it is useless threatening to no purpose." "I have not yet finished, Monsieur de Wardes, and you must listen to me further still." The circle of listeners, full of eager curiosity, drew closer. "You spoke just now of the honor of a woman and of the honor of your father. We were glad to hear you speak in that manner, for it is pleasing to think that such a sentiment of delicacy and rectitude, which did not exist, it seems, in our minds, lives in our children; and it is delightful, too, to see a young man, at an age when men from habit become the destroyers of the honor of women, respect and defend it." De Wardes bit his lip and clenched his hands, evidently much disturbed to learn how this discourse, the commencement of which was announced in so threatening a manner, would terminate. "How did it happen, then, that you allowed yourself to say to M. de Bragelonne that he did not know who his mother was?" Raoul's eyes flashed as, darting forward, he exclaimed, "Chevalier, this is a personal affair of my own." At which exclamation a smile, full of malice, passed across De Wardes's face. D'Artagnan put Raoul aside, saying, "Do not interrupt me, young man." And looking at De Wardes in an authoritative manner, he continued, "I am now dealing with a matter which cannot be settled by means of the sword. I discuss it before men of honor, all of whom have more than once had their swords in their hands in affairs of honor. I selected them expressly. These gentlemen well know that every secret for which men fight ceases to be a secret. I again put my question to M. de Wardes. What was the subject of conversation when you offended this young man in offending his father and mother at the same time?" "It seems to me," returned De Wardes, "that liberty of speech is allowed when it is supported by every means which a man of courage has at his disposal." "Tell me what the means are by which a man of courage can sustain a slanderous expression." "The sword." "You fail, not only in logic, in your argument, but in religion and honor. You expose the lives of many others without referring to your own, which seems to be full of hazard. Besides, fashions pass away, monsieur, and the fashion of dueling has passed away without referring in any way to the edicts of his majesty which forbid it. Therefore, in order to be consistent with your own chivalrous notions, you will at once apologize to M. de Bragelonne. You will tell him how much you regret having spoken so lightly, and that the nobility and purity of his race are inscribed, not in his heart alone, but still more in every action of his life. You will say this, M. de Wardes, as I, an old officer, did and said just now to your boy's mustache." "And if I refuse?" inquired De Wardes. "In that case, the result will be—" "That which you think you will prevent," said De Wardes, laughing. "The result will be that your conciliatory address will end in a violation of the king's prohibition." "Not so," said the captain; "you are quite mistaken." "What will the result be, then?" "The result will be that I shall go to the king, with whom I am on tolerably good terms, to whom I have been happy enough to render certain services, dating from a period when you were not born, and who, at my request, has just sent me an order in blank for M. de Besmieux de Montlezun, governor of the Bastille, and I shall say to the king, 'Sire, a man has in a most cowardly way insulted M. de Bragelonne by insulting his mother. I have written this man's name upon the lettre de cachet which your majesty has been kind enough to give me, so that M. de Wardes is in the Bastille for 3 years.'" And D'Artagnan, drawing the order signed by the king from his pocket, held it towards De Wardes. Remarking that the young man was not quite convinced, and received the warning as an idle threat, he shrugged his shoulders and walked leisurely towards the table, upon which lay a writing case and a pen, the length of which would have terrified the topographical Porthos. De Wardes then saw that nothing could well be more seriously intended than the threat in question, for the Bastille, even at that period, was already held in dread. He advanced a step towards Raoul, and, in an almost unintelligible voice, said, "I offer my apologies in the terms which M. d'Artagnan just now dictated, and which I am forced to make to you." "One moment, monsieur," said the musketeer with greatest tranquillity. "You mistake the terms of the apology. I did not say, 'and I am forced to make,' I said, 'and which my conscience induces me to make.' This latter expression, believe me, is better than the former, and it will be far preferable, since it will be the most truthful expression of your sentiments." "I subscribe to it," said De Wardes; "but submit, gentlemen, that a thrust of the sword through the body, as was the custom formerly, was far better than tyranny like this." "No, monsieur," replied Buckingham, "for the sword thrust, when received, was no indication that a particular person was right or wrong; it only showed that he was more or less skillful in the use of weapons." "Monsieur!" exclaimed De Wardes. "There, now," interrupted D'Artagnan, "you are going to say something very rude, and I am rendering a service by stopping you in time." "Is that all, monsieur?" inquired De Wardes. "Absolutely everything," replied D'Artagnan; "and these gentlemen, as well as myself, are quite satisfied with you." Believe me, monsieur, that your reconciliations are not successful." "In what way?" "Because, as we are now about to separate, I would wager that M. de Bragelonne and myself are greater enemies than ever." "You are deceived, monsieur, as far as I am concerned," returned Raoul, "for I do not retain the slightest animosity in my heart against you." This last blow overwhelmed De Wardes. He cast his eyes around him like a man bewildered. D'Artagnan saluted most courteously the gentlemen who had been present at the explanation, and every one, on leaving the room, shook hands with him, but not one hand was held out toward De Wardes. "Oh!" exclaimed the young man, "can I not find someone on whom to wreak my vengeance?" "You can, monsieur, for I am here," whispered a voice full of menace in his ear. De Wardes turned round and saw the Duke of Buckingham, who, having probably remained behind with that intention, had just approached him. "You, monsieur?" exclaimed De Wardes. "Yes, I. I am no subject of the king of France. I am not going to remain on the territory, since I am about setting off for England. I have accumulated in my heart such a mass of despair and rage that I, too, like yourself, need to revenge myself upon someone. I approve M. d'Artagnan's principles profoundly, but I am not bound to apply them to you. I am an Englishman, and in my turn I propose to you what you propose to others to no purpose. Since you, therefore, are so terribly incensed, take me as a remedy. In 34 hours' time I shall be at Calais. Come with me; the journey will appear shorter if together than if alone. We will fight, when we get there, upon the sands which are covered by the rising tide, and which form part of the French territory during 6 hours of the day, but belong to the territory of heaven during the other 6. "I accept willingly," said De Wardes. "I assure you," said the duke, "that if you kill me, you will be rendering me an infinite service." "I will do my utmost to make myself agreeable to you, duke," said De Wardes. "It is agreed, then, that I am to carry you off with me?" "I shall be at your commands. I need some real danger and some mortal risk to run to tranquilize me." "In that case, I think you have met with what you are looking for. Farewell, Monsieur de Wardes. Tomorrow morning my valet will tell you the exact hour of our departure. We can travel together like two excellent friends. I generally travel as fast as I can. Adieu." Buckingham saluted De Wardes, and returned toward the king's apartments. De Wardes, irritated beyond measure, left the Palais Royal, and hurried through the streets homeward to the house where he lodged. Chapter
21 of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 21. Baisemeaux de Montlezun. After the austere lesson administered to De Wardes, Athos and D'Artagnan together descended the staircase which led to the courtyard of the Palais Royal. "You perceive," said Athos to D'Artagnan, "that Raoul cannot, sooner or later, avoid a duel with De Wardes, for De Wardes is as brave as he is vicious and wicked." "I know such fellows well," replied D'Artagnan. "I had an affair with the father. I assure you that, although at that time I had good muscles and a sort of brute courage, I assure you that the father did me some mischief. But you should have seen how I fought it out with him. Ah, Athos, such encounters never take place in these times. I had a hand which could never remain at rest, a hand like quicksilver. You knew its quality, for you have seen me at work. My sword was no longer than a piece of steel. It was a serpent that assumed every form and every length, seeking where it might thrust its head, in other words, where it might fix its bite. I advanced half a dozen paces, then 3, and then body to body. I pressed my antagonist closely, then I darted back again 10 paces. No human power could resist that ferocious ardor. Well, De Wardes the father, with the bravery of his race, with his dogged courage, occupied a good deal of my time, and my fingers at the end of the engagement were, I well remember, tired enough. It is then as I said, resumed Athos, the sun will always be looking out for Raoul, and will end by meeting him, and Raoul can easily be found when he is sought for. Agreed, but Raoul calculates well. He bears no grudge against De Wardes. He has said so. He will wait until he is provoked, and in that case his position is a good one. The king will not be able to get out of temper about the matter. Besides, we shall know how to pacify his majesty. But why so full of these fears and anxieties? You don't easily get alarmed. I will tell you what makes me anxious. Raoul is to see the king tomorrow, when his majesty will inform him of his wishes respecting a certain marriage. Raoul, loving as he does, will get out of temper, and once in an angry mood, if he were to meet De Wardes, the shell would explode. We will prevent the explosion. Not I, said Athos, for I must return to Blois. All this gilded elegance of the court, all these intrigues sicken me. I am no longer a young man who can make terms with the meanness of the day. I have read in the great book many things too beautiful and too comprehensive to longer take any interest in the trifling phrases which these men whisper among themselves when they wish to deceive others. In one word, I am weary of Paris, wherever and whenever you are not with me. And as I cannot have you with me always, I wish to return to Blois. How wrong you are, Athos! How you gainsay your origin and the destiny of your noble nature! Men of your stamp are created to continue to the very last moment, in full possession of their great faculties. Look at my sword, a Spanish blade, the one I wore at La Rochelle. It served me for 30 years without fail. One day in the winter it fell upon the marble floor on the Louvre and was broken. I had a hunting knife made of it, which will last 100 years yet. You, Athos, with your loyalty, your frankness, your cool courage, and your sound information, are the very man kings need to warn and direct them. Remain here. Monsieur Fouquet will not last as long as my Spanish blade. Is it possible, said Athos, smiling, that my friend D'Artagnan, who after having raised me to the skies, making me an object of worship, casts me down to the top of Olympus and hurls me to the ground? I have more exalted ambition, D'Artagnan. To be a minister, to be a slave, never. Am I not still greater? I am nothing. I remember having heard you occasionally call me the great Athos. I defy you, therefore, if I were minister, to continue to bestow that title upon me. No, no, I will not yield myself in this manner. We will not speak of it any more, then. Renounce everything, even the brotherly feeling which unites us. It is almost cruel what you say. D'Artagnan pressed Athos's hand warmly. No, no, renounce everything without fear. Raoul can get on without you. I am at Paris. In that case, I shall return to Blois. We will take leave of each other tonight. Tomorrow at daybreak I shall be on my horse again. You cannot return to your hotel alone. Why did you not bring Grimaud with you? Grimaud takes his rest now. He goes to bed early, for my poor old servant gets easily fatigued. He came from Blois with me, and I compelled him to remain within doors. For if, in retracing the 40 leagues which separate us from Blois, he needed to draw breath even, he would die without a murmur. But I don't want to lose Grimaud. You shall have one of my musketeers to carry a torch for you. Hola! Some one there, called out D'Artagnan, leaning over the gilded balustrade. The heads of 7 or 8 musketeers appeared. I wish some gentleman, who is so disposed, to escort the Comte de la Fere, cried D'Artagnan. Thank you for your readiness, gentlemen, said Athos. I regret to have occasion to trouble you in this manner. I would willingly escort the Comte de la Fere, said some one, if I had not to speak to Monsieur d'Artagnan. Who is that? said D'Artagnan, looking into the darkness. I, Monsieur d'Artagnan. Heaven forgive me, if that is not Monsieur Baisemeaux's voice. It is, monsieur. What are you doing in the courtyard, my dear Baisemeaux? I am waiting your orders, my dear Monsieur d'Artagnan. Wretch that I am, thought D'Artagnan. True, you have been told, I suppose, that some one was to be arrested, and have come yourself instead of sending an officer? I came because I had occasion to speak to you. You did not send to me? I waited until you were disengaged, said Monsieur Baisemeaux timidly. I leave you, D'Artagnan, said Athos. Not before I have presented Monsieur Baisemeaux de Montlezun, the governor of the Bastille. Baisemeaux and Athos saluted each other. Surely you must know each other, said D'Artagnan. I have an indistinct recollection of Monsieur Baisemeaux, said Athos. You remember, my dear, Baisemeaux, the king's guardsman, with whom we used formerly to have such delightful meetings in the cardinal's time?" "Perfectly," said Athos, taking leave of him with affability. "Monsieur le Comte de la Fere, whose nom de guerre was Athos," whispered D'Artagnan to Baisemeaux. "Yes, yes, a brave man, one of the celebrated four." "Precisely so. But, my dear Baisemeaux, shall we talk now?" "If you please." "In the first place, as for the orders, there are none. The king does not intend to arrest the person in question." "So much the worse," said Baisemeaux with a sigh. "What do you mean by so much the worse?" exclaimed D'Artagnan, laughing. "No doubt of it," returned the governor. "My prisoners are my income." "I beg your pardon, I did not see it in that light." "And so there are no orders," repeated Baisemeaux with a sigh. "What an admirable situation yours is, captain," he continued, after a pause. "Captain lieutenant of the musketeers." "Oh, it is good enough, but I don't see why you should envy me, you, governor of the Bastile, the first castle in France." "I am well aware of that," said Baisemeaux, in a sorrowful tone of voice. "You say that like a man confessing his sins. I would willingly exchange my profits for yours." "Don't speak of profits to me, if you wish to save me the bitterest anguish of mind. Why do you look first on one side and then on the other, as if you were afraid of being arrested yourself, you, whose business it is to arrest others?" "I was looking to see whether any one could see or listen to us. It would be safer to confer more in private, if you would grant me such a favor." "Baisemeaux, you seem to forget we are acquaintances of 35 years' standing. Don't assume such sanctified airs. Make yourself quite comfortable. I don't eat governors of the Bastile raw." "Heaven be praised." "Come into the courtyard with me. It's a beautiful moonlit night. We will walk up and down, arm in arm, under the trees, while you tell me your pitiful tale." He drew the doleful governor into the courtyard, took him by the arm, as he had said, and, in his rough, good-humored way, cried, "Out with it, rattle away, Baisemeaux. What have you got to say?" "It's a long story." "You prefer your own lamentations, then. My opinion is, it will be longer than ever. I'll wager you are making 50,000 francs out of your pigeons in the Bastile." "Would to heaven that were the case, Monsieur d'Artagnan." "You surprise me, Baisemeaux. Just look at you, acting the anchorite. I should like to show you your face in a glass, and you would see how plump and florid looking you are, as fat and round as a cheese, with eyes like lighted coals. And if it were not for that ugly wrinkle you try to cultivate on your forehead, you would hardly look 50 years old, and you are 60, if I am not mistaken." "Oh, quite true." "Of course, I knew it was true as the 50,000 francs profit you make." At which remark Baisemeaux stamped on the ground. "Well, well," said D'Artagnan, "I will add up your accounts for you. You were captain of M. Mazarin's guards, and 12,000 francs a year would in 20 years amount to 140,000 francs." "12,000 francs! Are you mad?" cried Baisemeaux. "The old miser gave me no more than 6,000, and the expenses of the post amounted to 6,500 francs. M. Colbert, who deducted the other 6,000 francs, condescended to allow me to take 50,000 francs as a gratification, so that, if it were not for my little estate at Montlezun, which brings me in 12,000 francs a year, I could not have met my engagements." "Well, then, how about the 50,000 francs from the Bastile? There, I trust, you are boarded and lodged, and get your 6,000 francs salary besides." "Admitted." "Whether the year be good or bad, there are 50 prisoners, who, on the average, bring you in 1,000 francs a year each." "I don't deny it." "Well, there is at once an income of 50,000 francs. You have held the post 3 years, and must have received in that time 150,000 francs." "You forget one circumstance, dear Monsieur d'Artagnan." "What is that?" "That while you received your appointment as captain from the king himself, I received mine as governor from Messieurs Tremblay and Louviere." "Quite right, and Tremblay was not a man to let you have the post for nothing." "Nor Louviere either. The result was, that I gave 75,000 francs to Tremblay as his share." "Very agreeable that. And to Louviere?" "The very same." "Money down?" "No, that would have been impossible. The king did not wish, or rather, Monsieur Mazarin did not wish to have the appearance of removing those two gentlemen who had sprung from the barricades. He permitted them, therefore, to make certain extravagant conditions for their retirement. What were those conditions? Tremble. 3 years' income for the goodwill. The deuce! So that the 150,000 francs have passed into their hands. Precisely so. And beyond that, a sum of 150,000 francs, or 15,000 pistoles, whichever you please, in 3 payments. Exorbitant. Yes, but that is not all. What besides? In default of the fulfilment by me of any one of those conditions, those gentlemen enter upon their functions again. The king has been induced to sign that. It is monstrous, incredible. Such is the fact, however. I do indeed pity you, Baisemeaux. But why, in the name of fortune, did Monsieur Mazarin grant you this pretended favor? It would have been far better to have refused you altogether. Certainly, but he was strongly persuaded to do so by my protector. Who was he? One of your own friends, indeed, Monsieur d'Herblay. Monsieur d'Herblay? Aramis? Just so. He has been very kind towards me. Kind? To enter you into such a bargain? Listen. I wish to leave the cardinal's service. Monsieur d'Herblay spoke on my behalf to Louviere and Tremblay. They objected. I wished to have the appointment very much, for I knew what it could be made to produce. In my distress I confided in Monsieur d'Herblay, and he offered to become my surety for the different payments. You astound me. Aramis became your surety? Like a man of honor, he procured the signature. Tremblay and Louviere resigned their appointments. I have paid every year 25,000 francs to these two gentlemen. On the 21st of May every year, Monsieur d'Herblay himself comes into the Bastille, and brings me 5,000 pistoles to distribute between my crocodiles. You owe Aramis 150,000 francs, then? That is the very thing which is the cause of my despair, for I only owe him 100,000. I don't quite understand you. He came and settled with the vampires only 2 years. Today, however, is the 31st of May, and he has not been yet, and tomorrow at midday the payment falls due. If therefore I don't pay tomorrow, those gentlemen can, by the terms of the contract, break off the bargain. I shall be stripped of everything. I shall have worked for 3 years, and given 250,000 francs for nothing, absolutely nothing at all, dear Monsieur d'Artagnan. This is very strange, murmured D'Artagnan. You can now imagine that I may well have wrinkles on my forehead, can you not? Yes, indeed. And you can imagine, too, that notwithstanding I may be as round as a cheese, with a complexion like an apple, and my eyes like coals on a fire, I may almost be afraid that I shall not have a cheese or an apple left me to eat, and that my eyes will be left me only to weep with. It is really a very grievous affair. I have come to you, Monsieur d'Artagnan, for you are the only man who can get me out of my trouble. In what way? You are acquainted with the Abbe d'Herblay, and you know that he is a somewhat mysterious gentleman. Yes. Well, you can perhaps give me the address of his presbytery, for I have been to Noisy-le-Sec, and he is no longer there. I should think not, indeed. He is Bishop of Vannes. What? Vannes in Bretagne? Yes. The little man began to tear his hair, saying, How can I get to Vannes from here by midday tomorrow? I am a lost man. Your despair quite distresses me. Vannes, Vannes, cried Baisemeaux. But listen, a bishop is not always a resident. Monsieur d'Herblay may not possibly be so far away as you fear. Pray tell me his address. I really don't know it. In that case I am lost. I will go and throw myself at the king's feet. But, Baisemeaux, I can hardly believe what you tell me. Besides, since the Bastille is capable of producing 50,000 francs a year, why have you not tried to screw 100,000 out of it? Because I am an honest man, Monsieur d'Artagnan, and because my prisoners are fed like ambassadors. Well, you're in a fair way to get out of your difficulties. Give yourself a good attack of indigestion with your excellent living, and put yourself out of the way between this and midday tomorrow. How can you be hard-hearted enough to laugh? Nay, you really afflict me. Come, Baisemeaux, if you can pledge me your word of honor, do so, that you will not open your lips to any one about what I am going to say to you." "Never, never." "You wish to put your hands on Aramis?" "At any cost." "Well, go and see where M. Fouquet is." "Why, what connection can there be?" "How stupid you are! Don't you know that Vannes is in the diocese of Belle Isle, or Belle Isle is in the diocese of Vannes? Belle Isle belongs to M. Fouquet, and M. Fouquet nominated M. d'Herblay to that bishopric." "I see, I see. You restore me to life again." "So much the better. Go and tell M. Fouquet very simply that you wish to speak to M. d'Herblay." Of course," exclaimed Baisemeaux delightedly. "But," said D'Artagnan, checking him with a severe look, "your word of honor?" "I give you my sacred word of honor," replied the little man, about to set off running. "Where are you going?" "To M. Fouquet's house." "It is useless doing that. M. Fouquet is playing at cards with the king. All you can do is to pay M. Fouquet a visit early to-morrow morning." "I will do so, thank you." "Good luck attend you," said D'Artagnan. "Thank you." "This is a strange affair," murmured D'Artagnan, as he slowly ascended the staircase after he had left Baisemeaux. "What possible interest can Aramis have in obliging Baisemeaux in this manner? Well, I suppose we shall learn some day or another." Chapter 22.